Imagine waking up tomorrow and not fearing, knowing times that within 2 years, there's a real chance that half the people you love will be dead, your neighbors, your children, maybe you. Now imagine there's no explanation, no news, no science, no doctor who can help. People are simply swelling up, turning black, and dying within 3 days of feeling the first ache, and nobody knows why. This wasn't a nightmare. This was an ordinary Tuesday in the 1300s, arguably the single most dangerous century to be a human being who ever lived. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. The people who lived through it weren't a psychological wreck. In many ways, they held together better than we do sitting here, safe, fed, and more anxious than any generation in history. Today, we're going to live inside their world for a few minutes, and then ask the question that should haunt every one of us. How were they stronger in hell than we are in paradise? Let's start before the worst even hits, because normal life in the 14th century was already brutal by our standards. You're most likely a peasant, about 85% of people were. Your entire life is farming land you don't own. For a lord who does, your day carved into pieces by the ringing of church bells. That's it. That's the whole map of your existence, and you will probably never travel further than a day's walk from where you were born. Death is not an occasional visitor here. It's a roommate. If you're a poor laborer, your life expectancy is around 30 years. Now that number is misleading, because so many babies died that the average gets dragged way down. If you survive childhood, you might actually reach 50 or 60. But sit with what that means. To reach the average, you had to watch an enormous number of children die. Burying a child wasn't a tragedy that broke you for life. It was an expected event. And this is before the plague. This is the times, good times, years. Then the century starts stacking catastrophes like it's trying to break a record. First, the weather turns. Between 1315 and 1322, Northern Europe is hit by the Great Famine. Cold, endless rain rots the crops in the fields year after year. People eat their seed grain, the grain they were supposed to plant next season, because starving today beats planning for tomorrow. Then they eat the animals. Then, in the worst-hit places, there are accounts of people doing things to survive that are too dark to say lightly. By the time it ends, an estimated 10 to 15% of the population of England is simply gone, starved to death. And the survivors? Weakened, malnourished, their bodies primed and vulnerable for what's coming next, because the famine was just the opening act. In 1347, ships arrive at European ports carrying something no one has a name for. Within 4 years, it kills somewhere between a third and half of everyone in Europe, tens of millions of people. In the city of Florence, 60% of the population dies in a matter of months. Try to actually picture that. 6 out of every 10 people you know, your family, your street, your whole world gone before the year is out. And the way it killed was a special kind of horror. You'd feel an ache, then swellings would erupt under your arms and in your groin. One chronicler in Siena wrote that victims would swell beneath their armpits and in their groins and fall over dead while talking. From first symptom to dead body was often 2 or 3 days. 80% of the infected didn't survive the week. There was no understanding of germs that wouldn't come for 500 years. So, to the people living it, there was no rational cause at all. Death was everywhere. It was random, it was fast, and it came from nowhere. The dead lay in the streets because the living were too frightened to touch them, and the old way of burying your loved ones as a family, with a blessing, a goodbye, collapsed. There were too many bodies, so they dug massive pits and threw strangers in together, without ceremony, without names. This is the world. Now here's the real question. How did a human mind survive it? Here's the first thing that held them together, and it's the big one. They had an unshakable framework that explained everything. For the medieval mind, death was not the end, it was a doorway. This life was the short, painful part. The real, eternal life came after. Suffering wasn't meaningless, it was a test, a preparation, part of a cosmic plan you didn't need to fully understand because God did. When your child died, they hadn't vanished into nothing. They'd gone ahead to a better place, and you would see them again. We can debate whether that belief was true, but psychologically, it was armor. Because the thing that actually breaks the human mind isn't suffering. It's suffering that feels times meaningless. Pain with a reason attached can be endured almost indefinitely. Pain that means nothing corrodes you from the inside. The medieval person had a reason for everything, no matter how horrific, and that reason held the walls up when the world was ending. The second thing, they were not afraid of death the way we are, because they had never been protected from it. For them, death was completely woven into daily life. It happened at home, in the open, surrounded by family. Children saw it. You prayed beside the dying. Bodies weren't whisked away by professionals. They were washed and prepared by the people who loved them. Death wasn't a hidden, sanitized, terrifying stranger. It was a known face, a part of the rhythm of life, as ordinary as birth. And here's the strange gift in that. When you live alongside death your whole life, you make a kind of peace with it. You're not spending your energy pretending it isn't coming. You've already accepted the deal. That acceptance freed up something in them, the ability to actually live times in the shadow of death, instead of being paralyzed by the fear of it. And the third thing, maybe the most important, they never faced any of it alone. There was no such thing as an isolated individual in a medieval village. You were born into a tight web family, neighbors, the church, the whole community that you belonged to completely, whether you liked it or not. When catastrophe hit, you suffered times together. You grieved together, prayed together, buried the dead together. The weight was heavy, but it was shared across many shoulders. Nobody sat alone in a room processing their trauma in silence. The community was the container that held the pain. And that belonging, that total, unquestioned sense that you were part of something bigger than yourself, is one of the most powerful psychological protections a human being can have. So now, let's turn the mirror around. Because we have to face something uncomfortable. We have everything they didn't. We have medicine, full stomachs, warm homes, a life expectancy that would look like sorcery to them. The plague that terrified them, we'd cure with antibiotics. By every external measure, we won. We live in the paradise they couldn't even dream of. And we are, by many measures, the most anxious, depressed, and lonely generation in human history. How? How are we falling apart in comfort while they held together in catastrophe? Look at what we traded away. They had meaning, a story that made sense of suffering. Many of us have a quiet void where that used to be, and we try to fill it with work and distraction. They had an honest relationship with death. We've hidden it away in hospitals and refused to think about it, so it terrifies us from the shadows. They had community that held them without question, and we have followers, feeds, and the highest rate of loneliness ever recorded, often sitting alone in rooms, carrying everything by ourselves. We solved the problem of physical safety so completely that we forgot the mind needs other things to survive. Meaning, an acceptance of death, and each other. They had almost no control over whether they lived times, but they had all three of the things that let a person survive being alive. We have near total control over our survival, and we're starving for the very things that made theirs bearable. So were they stronger than us? Not really. That's not it. They weren't made of tougher stuff. They just still had the three things a human mind actually runs on: a reason for the pain, a peace with the ending, and a group that carried them. We got rich enough to think we'd outgrown all three, and then we quietly fell apart without them. The person plowing a field in 1349, who'd buried half their family and knew the plague might take them next, they had something a lot of us are still searching for, standing in the safest, most comfortable moment in human history. They knew why they were suffering. They knew they weren't alone in it, and they knew, without a shred of doubt, that they belonged to something. Maybe the deadliest century didn't just have something to teach us about how people died. Maybe it has more to teach us about how to live.